A very warm welcome, everybody, to a deep dive of our Business for Humanity series, where we're trying to get close to some of the efforts and movements that are helping to make the world of business better and seek to focus on social benefits and values rather than simply profit. And in this context, it's our greatest pleasure today to have with us Bill Clark. Bill, hello and welcome.
Hello, Otti, and hello, Antoinette. Nice to see both of you.
Hello.
Wonderful to have you, and indeed, welcome also to Antoinette, my usual partner in crime and professor of the University of St. Gallen. Hey, Antoinette.
Hello, everybody.
And I want to introduce Bill properly because Bill is a godfather, if I can say it that way, of the B Corp movement. Bill is a highly experienced attorney with a focus on corporate law, business law, and benefit corporations. He played a significant role in drafting the statutes that enabled the formation of benefit corporations in the US, including California, New Jersey, New York. We're going to hear more about it, and then also laid the ground for international expansion of benefit corporations. He's also former chair of the business law section of the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the Philadelphia Bar Association, and has been throughout his time an active contributor to the American Law Institute. He's very well known for his work on issues related to director and officer liability in the context of B Corps, and has been providing crucial legal insights, including today when Bill has officially retired, but of course hasn't really, in the evolving landscape of social responsible business structures. And what we discussed in the pre-call, which is also curious and might come back during our conversation, Bill has not only a law degree from the university, from Temple University, but also further academic qualifications and a degree from the Westminster Theological Seminary. So with all of that, Bill, it's a wonderful pleasure to have you here, and I'm much looking forward to this conversation. I will briefly frame the context, as always, to just explain where we are coming from. So Antoinette and I created a laboratory called Good Organizations about 3 years ago with the intention to develop a moral theory of management. And under this laboratory, we are hosting a number of dialogues and conversations focused on the kind of foundational research in organizational science and ethics, on the development and certification of good organizations, on professional qualifications for leaders, and also for regulation and policy in developing a good economy that potentially can help benefit or social value-oriented organizations to survive in a competitive marketplace. So in that context, today our focus is all going to be about the battles for B Corps, and we are very, very curious to hear some of the battle stories from Bill. We're going to touch on, after a brief presentation of Bill himself, we're going to touch on hopefully 5 topics in the next hour. The first is kind of what is a B Corp? What is the distinctive aspect of B Corp legislation and some of the other regulatory aspects? How does it compare to, in the second point, to some of the alternatives that we're seeing in the US, but also across Europe? Then the main discussion about how have B Corps come about? What were the battles? What were the stories that Bill, running around, rushing around all the different states in the US, has experienced himself? And then we want to look briefly at B Corps in practice since the legislation has been approved, where it has been approved. How has it played out? What are the actual reporting requirements, and especially the monitoring in terms of the ongoing creation of benefits? In this context, also interesting to maybe discuss that there are not so many publicly owned B Corps around, and we're going to talk to Bill about why this is the case and what that means. And finally, some critical analysis. There have been some challenges to benefit corporations. Some people believe they're actually more about greenwashing than creating social value. So we're going to go into that, and we're going to ask Bill what maybe in the broader context of legislation must change in order for B Corps to flourish. All of this is a challenging agenda for an hour, so we're going to dive straight into this. And before I hand over to Antoinette to kick off the first section, Bill, can I maybe ask you to kind of introduce yourself with any words that you feel are more appropriate, and provide a little bit the story of how you came to B Corps.
Yes, happy to do that, Otti. I have, for all of my career, been involved on a pro bono basis, largely for various bar associations, in the effort to revise and modernize business entity laws. So all the way back at the beginning of my career, I began to work with a partner in the law firm that I first joined out of law school, who had, for years before I entered the bar, been involved in writing the Pennsylvania Business Corporation Law. And he was in the process, when I first became a lawyer, of working on a major revision of the Pennsylvania Business Corporation Law. He took me under his wings. He became my mentor and taught me all about legislative drafting. And I worked with him on this major revision of the Pennsylvania Corporation Law, which was enacted in 1988. Following that, we worked on a number of cleanup amendments, specific issues involving corporation law, and then eventually turned our attention to revising the other business entity laws in the United States. So the laws on partnerships, limited partnerships, more recently limited liability companies, et cetera. My mentor sadly died in the early 1990s, and from that point on, I have been responsible for writing all of the Pennsylvania business entity laws.
Wow.
So that's another, 25, almost 30 years at this point, where I've been doing that work, not on a paying basis, but as I say, for bar associations and other organizations. I then was asked to join a committee of the American Bar Association, which is in charge of revising the Model Business Corporation Act. And that act has been enacted in about 35 states around the United States. So I did that effort. Then I became the reporter for the Model Nonprofit Corporation Act, which is prepared by another committee of the American Bar Association. And so in my role as reporter, I was responsible for drafting the 2008 and also the 2022 revisions of the Model Nonprofit Corporation Act.
Wow.
And then at the same time, I became involved with an organization called the Uniform Law Commission, which is an organization that has representatives from all 50 states as well as a number of territories in the United States. And its goal is to prepare laws that can be a form or a model for the states to enact on various subjects. The most well-known of the Uniform Law Commission projects is actually the Uniform Commercial Code. The ULC, the Uniform Law Commission, also prepared the Uniform Trust Code, which has been adopted widely in the United States. And it also prepares what we call unincorporated business entity laws. So unlike the corporation laws, the laws on partnerships, limited liability companies, statutory trusts, et cetera, are all laws that provide for the organization of business in an unincorporated form. And so I was involved in those drafting committees. I was a reporter for 3 Uniform Law Commission business entity law projects, and at the moment, I'm the reporter for a complete revision of all of the uniform unincorporated entity laws, which have not been revised since 2013. So all of that is simply to say that for all of my career, I've had this deep immersion in business entity laws, all on a non-paying basis. But it's caused me to kind of learn business entity law in a really deep way.
Wonderful.
So,
and I think you said,
sorry,
Bill, in the pre-call that the shift from seminary to law school was the greatest fall in your life. I think actually what you're showing is it might be a very fruitful path of redemption. Can I just ask, what is a reporter? Apologies for not being in the legal terminology.
Sorry. Yes. The reporter is the person who is actually responsible for putting the words on paper. So
Hmm.
it's the job of the reporter to actually draft
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
decide the formulation and how the words are constructed and the shape of the statute, how it's organized into chapters and sections. I mean, it's kind of the person who writes it.
Hmm. I find it extremely inspiring already to hear what kind of legacy you have created. And I hope that my students are listening to this because they never want to do law drafting or redrafting. That seems to be the less sexy case, but I think it's the much more sexy case. So let's find out a little bit more about that. And I,
Thank you, Antoinette. I agree with you, but I think it will be very difficult to convince your students
yeah.
uh, because it does take a certain personality and the ability to sit with large stacks of paper in front of you for hours on end as you worry about the nuance of choosing particular words and other things.
Yeah, but it's still, I mean, as a behavioral researcher, I never understand why that should be the more interesting part. But that's another story, of course. I mean, because it's,
Well, actually, one thought that's worth offering here is that throughout my career, I've had a number of occasions to talk to clients in particular who faced a particular legal problem. And their immediate thought is, well, how do I bring a lawsuit to get this issue resolved? And one of the things I always say to them is, if you don't like the law and you have good reasons for wanting to change it, don't go to court. Let's go to the legislature.
Mm.
Because then you have more control and you have the legislative process, which tends, I find, to work very well in the public interest and the balancing of perspectives as you move through the legislative process tends to get a pretty good result. And I've done that with a number of clients over the years. So,
But here might be the problem, right? Most of the people going to create lawsuits are probably not acting or interested in the public interest, right? So maybe that's why they're shunning the legislative process. But
yeah,
just
I
a
get,
thought.
I guess quite a lot,
uh,
but still, I mean, listen, students. Now, let's move into the material, and I start with probably the easy questions, but I think these need to be clarified. So, I first would want to know what sets B Corps apart from traditional stakeholder-centric companies, and in that regard, also, why does that require legal changes?
yes. Um, Before we get into that discussion directly, let's make sure we're clear on terminology just for
Yeah.
1 minute. Um, because the term B Corp is a shorthand that can mean either of two very different things. So there is now the benefit corporation legal structure,
Mhm.
and there is separate from that what we refer to as certified B Corps, right? So a certified B Corp is a business that has gone through a process that allows it to refer to itself as a certified B Corp because it's been approved and its performance has been investigated by an organization called B Lab. Um, and actually, Otti, when you first introduced me, you said I was retired. I have come out of retirement and I'm now working half-time as the general counsel of B Lab. So I come with an interest in the certified B Corp concept, but I think for today, we want to talk about benefit corporations, right? So from now on, when we refer to B Corp or to benefit corporation, we mean the same thing.
Until we get to the practice, I think then we go into the licensing or certification. I don't know if that's the same licensing and certification, but I'll leave that to the
Yes,
practice part.
yes. So for the moment, B Corp means either benefit corporation or the term B Corp will refer to that.
Good,
Yes.
good.
Sorry, so why don't you restate your question now that we have the terminology straight?
Okay. What sets the benefit corporation apart from
Okay.
traditional stakeholder-centric companies, and why does that require legal changes? Why
Yes.
did we had to come up with a benefit corporation? That would be then the correct question.
So in the United States, the traditional understanding of a business corporation is that it is operated for the financial benefit of its owners, the shareholders. Okay. It's what's sometimes referred to as shareholder primacy or shareholder value maximization. The thought is that the job of the directors is to increase the value of the corporation for the benefit of the owners. That is something that a lot of people have begun to realize may be distorting in an unfavorable way the performance of corporations, as the pursuit of profit tends to dwarf any other concern or consideration. There are other people who believe that the best way to maximize the value of a corporation is for it, in fact, to be very concerned about its reputation and to develop a committed and happy workforce and happy clients and recognize its importance within the community. But when push comes to shove, the money always wins. I think that's pretty much, at least in the United States, the conclusion that you draw. So then the question is, if we want to create a different model, how do we go about doing that, and what does it look like? Okay. And here, it's going to be useful to tease out a number of different concepts. So let me begin with the laws that traditionally existed 100 years ago, which is you were either a business corporation or you were a nonprofit corporation. Okay. And in a nonprofit corporation, the basic rule was that you were prohibited from making distributions of the value or the assets of the corporation to the owners. So the non-distribution constraint was critical in the nonprofit side of things. Then in recent years, there's been a movement toward businesses that are more focused on their impact and are willing to take a look at broader issues than just financial profitability. And we'll talk about social enterprises in particular, and some models that have developed that are intended to really encourage and facilitate businesses that are run with a particular mission in mind. The benefit corporation was designed to be different than that. And this is the critical point about all of this. The notion of a benefit corporation is that it's a for-profit entity that has as its purpose being financially profitable, but its purpose also includes having material positive impact on society and the environment, taken as a whole, looked at, broadly and globally. And that impact is to come from the business and operations of the corporation. So the theory is that if you are a benefit corporation, you will run your business, whatever it may be, in a way that pays attention not just to your financial profitability, but also to the positive impact that you seek to have on society and the environment. So I'm sure a lot of people who may be listening to this will recognize this concept as what's often referred to as the triple bottom line, the focus on not just profit, but people and planet, society, and the environment as well. And the real theory is that any business can be a benefit corporation if it is run in a way that pays attention to what economists often call externalities, the cost that the business imposes on society that's not reflected in its costs of production. So a company that complies with environmental laws but doesn't worry about pollution that it may cause that is not prohibited by the environmental laws, those kinds of external costs that are imposed. So that's the theory of a benefit corporation.
So is Bill, sorry, just
sure,
before you, is this the same as the positive material impact that comes through sometimes in the secondary
yes.
kind of revision?
And in fact, those words are used in the benefit corporation statute, most of the benefit corporation statutes, not all of them, but material positive impact from business and operations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the benefit corporation statutes also provide that a benefit corporation may, as an option, adopt a specific purpose that it wants to foster as part of its impact, right? So you can imagine solar energy companies, view their commitment to the climate and to, alternative energy sources as key to their impact. But it's not simply that. When we've been out promoting the benefit corporation concept, a lot of people initially get it wrong. And they tend to think of benefit corporations as making possible or validating the model where it's Newman's Own, where all profits are given to charity. That's not the concept, because those profits could have come from a business that paid no attention to the externalities that it imposes on society and pays no attention to how it pays its workers and its impact on the climate. It's simply making lots of money, which it then donates to charity. That's not something we want to stop, but it's not enough to make as much money as you can and then give a portion of it or all of it away. So that's something that it's been somewhat difficult to always get people to understand. There are also a lot of people that look at the benefit corporation concept and think that it is largely addressed to permitting companies to adopt a specific mission. And so there are actually a number of states in the United States that were introduced to the benefit corporation, but ended up enacting statutes that are not full triple bottom line statutes. They simply say that you may adopt a purpose to create some kind of impact or public benefit, and that's sufficient for you to have this new status. We refer to those as social purpose corporations. They were first created in California, and there are a number of states that have only social purpose corporations. There are also some states that have both social purpose corporations and benefit corporations, California being one of those. The difference is that a social purpose corporation is a double bottom line as opposed to a triple bottom line. And I have never thought that you really needed the social purpose corporation model, because the law has always permitted a corporation to adopt a specific purpose. So if you say that your purpose is to, run daycare centers at a price that's affordable for lower income people, you can do that under the traditional model because you set it forth in your corporate charter, and everyone who invests in your corporation knows that that's what they're investing in. But what's different about the benefit corporation is that as your business grows and matures, how you behave in this responsible way that reduces your externalities and looks in whatever economic activity you're conducting to have a positive impact is not something you can easily set forth in your charter in a way that would be binding, as opposed to choosing just a particular economic
so it
activity.
really goes to the character of the organization in terms of how every single activity in the operation, so to speak, is run, insofar as it honors the triple bottom, the double constraint in social and environmental, at least taking care of the externalities, if not going beyond that. Is that fair?
Yes, that's essentially it. So in a social purpose corporation, for example, you could be committed to alternative energy sources, for example, and to helping the climate, but pay your employees less than a living wage.
I think this, again, it's just a thought, Antoinette. This goes really into the direction of our framing for the good organization, doesn't it? It's kind of the good product, the good work, and the good wealth, right? So it's bringing all the different aspects back into the how, the what, and the why, right? So we're very close here. Just Bill, reflecting on how we are developing our theory, it's quite interesting that you're making this explicit point. Having a better purpose statement is not necessarily taking care of what we call character, i.e. how the day-to-day operations are being run, right? It's okay, very, very interesting.
Yes, that's the heart of the benefit corporation concept, although a lot of people miss it. So
yeah,
it's
I can
very
imagine.
useful to have this discussion. And if you can help us with our basic message, that would be terrific.
Oh,
Antoinette,
you're
you're on
mute.
mute.
Hopefully, I'm not going to dilute it again, but I was just wondering, because still some people who write about the benefit corporation say, but you could do the same with Delaware. And then we have the famous Blair Stout interpretation of Delaware, which is often used by stakeholder scholars, kind of saying you can do already a lot. But maybe you have already explained it, but is there something you would answer to these people?
And maybe if we build on this, Bill, sorry, in terms of, because Antoinette's first question was, what are the specific components that make it different to the whatever conventional business? Can we maybe go in answering the question also to the what you consider the most important aspects, be it the statutes or be it the duties of the directors or the accountability mechanisms? What specifically have you drafted into the legislation?
Yes, let me do that. Just hold that thought for 1 minute, and I'll deal with Antoinette's question first. The law in Delaware traditionally gave lip service to the notion that as long as what you were doing in terms of trying to have a good impact, shall we say, has some arguable benefit to the long-term value of the corporation, the courts were not going to get involved. Okay. Delaware recently has actually begun to back off of that formulation. And they're now moving back, I think, toward the true shareholder value maximization model. Except, of course, that Delaware has its own benefit corporation statute, which it calls a public benefit corporation statute. That's one that we'll talk about in the
comparison
war stories, because my own view, and I'm on record publicly as saying this in other contexts, is that Delaware didn't quite understand and got it wrong. But we'll come to that later. So let's go back to the basic characteristics.
Yeah, so maybe what are the specific legal aspects that differentiate benefit corp, you need to watch my language here, benefit companies from the traditional form? And then let's move into the comparative section to maybe then pick up your thought on other alternative forms of incorporation and how, again, what you see the benefit company to be different.
There are three basic characteristics that differentiate a benefit corporation from other business corporations, but really other business organizations generally, which are all conducted for profit. So the first and most important change, in my view, is the redefinition of the purpose of the corporation. If you are a benefit corporation in the model that I created for B-Lab and that exists in probably 35 states around the United States, you, by adopting the benefit corporation form, are committed to having a material positive impact on society and environment in the whole, taken as a whole, from your business and operations. That's the basic responsible behavior and reducing externalities. That is a purpose that you cannot avoid. Okay. The second change involves the duties of the directors and the management of the corporation. Because if you're taking this broader view of your purpose and the obligations that you've undertaken, it would seem natural to require the directors and the officers, when they're making decisions, to consider the interests of people other than just the shareholders. So the duties of directors is redefined to require consideration of the interests of all stakeholders and the environment. So you change the purpose, you change the duties of the directors to really conform to that broader purpose. And then the third piece is the one that requires still, I think, the most work that lies in front of us. And that's the question of monitoring and enforcement of the new purpose and the duties. In a traditional corporation that's focused just on shareholder profits, it's fairly easy to figure out at the end of the year how the directors have performed because you look at the financials and they tell you really everything you need to know about the financial performance of the corporation. They don't do anywhere near as good a job in helping you understand the other two measures of the bottom line, the people and the planet, the society and the environment. So we concluded that to make all this work, there really should be an obligation to report on the broader performance and the accomplishment of the full purpose of the corporation. So there is a required reporting obligation. So it's those three things: purpose, duties of management, and reporting.
Can I go into the directors, the kind of the fiduciary duties of directors? Because I found, or better, Antoinette, who did a lot of research, found the notion of model legislation states that directors need not give priority to a particular interest or factor. Now, that's a different statement to directors must give, must be interested in all kind of economic and social and other stakeholder requirements. So which one is it? Is that a correct citation here in terms of the legislation, or does it differ?
It's actually close with the following elaboration. There is a requirement to consider the interest of all the stakeholders, but there is no requirement that in all cases, one of those interests must always be preferred or be given priority. Unlike in the traditional corporation where the shareholders always, in some sense, trump everything else.
So I'm creating more like a protection of the not being always limited to considering shareholder needs, rather than obligating everybody to always consider all stakeholders, or is it both?
Well, you must consider all of the stakeholders so that you make a decision that's informed by everyone's interest. But when you make that decision, you can decide in any particular instance which interest is most important or is entitled to greater weight in the particular decision. So, for example, if a company is in just general financial trouble, we don't want to say that you have to continue to necessarily prefer your employees or the environment over surviving as a business. On the other hand, there will be some issues where the interest of the employees, for example, may predominate. Think of, questions about pay scales and benefit packages and, the other things that would directly implicate the employees. And in other areas, a decision will be largely controlled by environmental or community or other aspects. And when you're creating a basic law for everyone in all circumstances that has to apply across the board, I concluded that you really can't be prescriptive and say,
I mean, at the end of the day, it requires wisdom, right? So it needs the contingent understanding, which of course leads us to the problem of, okay, we actually need good people to have good corporations. It's not only going to be an institutional question, and secondly, it's going to also require good institutions. And Antoinette on the chat was mentioning Colin Mayer about fair profit. So we need accounting that actually can internalize some of the externalities so that we get better understanding of the implications, not just making kind of judgment in our heads. So we need all of this. I want to just throw in one more question, Bill, looking at Christian social teaching that we interrogated last week with Cardinal Peter Turkson, looking at Mensuram, Bonham, and faith-based investing or faith-consistent investing. They have a clear set of exclusions in terms of sectors. be that nuclear weapons, be that fossil fuels, be that nasty computer games. So is there any such provision in benefit corporations to exclude things that by any moral standard wouldn't be considered good goods and services?
There is not.
Which is interesting.
The benefit corporation statute is conceived of most basically as an overlay on the general incorporation statute in each state. So you can organize a company for any purpose in Delaware, right? Including, arms manufacture or, marketing of cigarettes or whatever your preferred vice is. And and the Delaware statute and the statute in other states for benefit corporations is an overlay on that. And we didn't think it was appropriate to try and single out in that context particular problem industries. So, for example, is it theoretically the view that you could never organize a for-profit business to manufacture weapons on a benefit corporation platform? If, for example, you were only manufacturing weapons that you sold to law enforcement, right? Or if you were careful to only sell your weapons to organized democratic governance for equipping their army, should you be able to do that as a benefit corporation? And the answer,
so if we take cigarettes, which are proven to be cancerogenous, then I think you have a difficult stance beyond the fact that consumers might love their personal vices, right?
That's why I started with arms. I personally don't think that tobacco companies should exist, right? Like there is no redeeming social virtue.
Exactly.
But there's no way that we would want to go around to the states and say, here's this great idea, which also happens to exclude tobacco, right?
I think so. There's an acceptability constraint, but okay.
Oh, there's politics written all over this. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that I come out of, a political background, not as a politician, but working the system. And so this whole effort is designed to meet people from a variety of different perspectives and to bring them in. And so when we get to war stories, one of the things we worked very hard to do was to bring in both sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And we actually had a fair amount of success. There were, I think, 10 or 12 states in which we passed unanimously in both chambers of their legislature. And if you think about it, those on the political left would be very sympathetic to this concept to begin with. Those on the political right were very attracted by the notion that this is something that businesses are asking for, and it doesn't require anything from the government by way of tax incentives or contracting preferences or anything, and doesn't require any new bureaucracy. It's something simply that businesses want to do. And so we had a number of very conservative sponsors of the legislation. I think in particular here in Pennsylvania, a very conservative Republican who heard about this concept on National Public Radio. So that's a great idea. That, works for me. And his view was, this allows me to go home and feel good when I talk to my kids about the world I'm leaving for them, right? I mean,
yeah, and it should, right? Yeah. But maybe, do we want to quickly go to comparators?
I think at least a little bit. And I make it a little bit less complicated than we originally wanted to ask you. So I would just want to know whether there are any legal or statutory hybrid sector alternatives to the benefit corporation you find really very interesting and we should discuss about this. Maybe even more effective in Europe or wherever you find these.
Yes, there are. And the characteristic that differentiates them from the benefit corporation that's more important than anything else in my view is some kind of distribution constraint that is imposed on them. So in the United Kingdom, for example, there's something called the Community Interest Corporation. That is a quasi for-profit corporation, but it limits the amount of money that can be taken out for the benefit of the shareholders. There's a similar concept in the United States called the Low Profit Limited Liability Company, and the name itself says it all. It's not that the profits themselves are constrained, but what you can do with the profits are constrained and have to be funneled back into the mission, really. You may have noticed that one of the countries that enacted benefit corporation legislation is Rwanda. And what happened in Rwanda is that they adopted classic benefit corporation legislation. And it will not surprise you to know that I was involved in writing the text of that law. But after it was enacted, they added regulations, so not through the legislative process, but through the administrative process that imposed a distribution constraint. And so that actually then takes the Rwanda model out of consideration. And they also added a requirement that you have a particular mission that you must focus on.
Okay.
So there are.
Why is this bad? Or kind of, what are the implications rather than good or bad?
It's not bad. Okay, I would not want to ever be portrayed as saying it's bad. It's simply not what we were trying to accomplish with the benefit corporation because it is inherently limited in its ultimate use and benefit for society. What we have been trying to create is a model that could work for every business. In fact, we think ultimately that the world in which we need to live is one in which every business has this basic commitment to running its business in a way that has a positive impact, even if not required by the law and regulations, but simply because people want to be more responsible.
Would it not imply not a low, but a lower profit, so to speak? Because I'm going close to the notion of just profit if I'm considering all the share and stakeholders in my modus operandi, don't I?
Maybe. I don't think.
So let's put it that way. Maximization of profit cannot be the goal of the company anymore, because that would put certain stakeholders over others by the very definition of maximization.
Yes, agreed. If you include in maximization cutting every corner and doing and pushing up against the firm established boundaries of the actual law itself, yes, agreed. Because many of the externalities that are so troubling for us, right, the carbon pollution that comes out of burning fossil fuels is not prohibited. And so, yes, there is that point. So in a sense, maybe profit that's produced by a benefit corporation that's really living up to its commitment is a profit that's just in a way that other profits are not just. I agree with that. But I would also take the position, well, I guess this is inherent in the term just, that profit that it goes beyond just being just is improper.
Yeah, I think I like this understanding that justice is a way of relating to each other. And I think what is implied by what you've described is a respectful way of relating with each other in society and relating to nature and the world around us. And therefore, justice is not simply a distributive kind of legal requirement or fairness requirement. It's a actually caring about the way I'm doing things and who I'm becoming through the doing. And in that regard, I think just profit is a bit of a placeholder for a way of being as opposed to what is the outcome, the consequence of the action, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And in fact, we haven't yet mentioned Milton Friedman, and you can't have one of these conversations without mentioning Milton
Go ahead.
Friedman. Well, even in his insistence on the job of businesses to make a profit, he recognized that there's also an element of complying with social norms and what's accepted behavior. So you read his stuff, and we focus on the importance of making as much money as you can, but he even was willing to recognize that social norms and customs could play a factor in how you run your business. I mean, it's obviously not
But
his
now that
basic
we're on to
concern.
Milton Friedman, I think we need to go into the battle stories. I think.
Yeah, no.
And I just want to say something about Friedman. Yes, he has that in it, but we are now in a time where these norms are completely different as when he wrote that, and also the regulations have been seen so strongly by large corporations that I believe, unfortunately, that wouldn't rescue us.
I didn't want to open that Pandora's box, but we're going to come back to that.
Sorry about that.
In terms of regulation and context, in the last section, if we get there, I think there is a big question as to whether we, to Antoinette's point, need not also change the context for goodness to emerge or benefits to emerge in the way that we're describing it here. But I was so curious when we spoke in Rome about this bill. I really want to understand how did you make this happen, and what were the kind of most exciting / interesting aspects of this battle for B Corp?
Right. So when I was first asked to become involved, it was as a result of requests from one of my partners at the law firm where I was a partner and actually retired from. That law firm had a client by the name of And1, which made basketball shoes. And that company was founded by three friends from college. Eventually, that company was sold, and those three friends then decided to do something completely different and not start a new company, but instead they started B Lab. I had not worked for the basketball shoe company, but when they started this new venture, one of my partners at the law firm that had worked for And1 told me that these guys were considering the need to change business entity law to make it more responsible. And he asked me if I would talk to them. And I said, sure, happy to go see what they think. I did offer my untutored opinion at the time that it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard of. Made absolutely no sense. But you have to understand that at that point, I've been working for the man for 30 years. And so I say, sure, I'll go. And I talked to them, treated it like any other client project and said, where does the law pinch? What needs to be changed? And so we started to talk about it. It only took about a month for me, as I'm thinking about this, to realize that this is pretty important, and that this is an opportunity to do something else. So in any event, that's what led to the creation of the benefit corporation model. So very early on, when B Lab first started, this was always part of their work, and it's something that I just continued to do for them. And now, it's hard to imagine a world in which people aren't talking about all this stuff, because it's so important. So I had, as I explained, a lot of background and time developing business entity law. And I knew that the best way to do this would be to just come up with provisions that addressed what we think were the real issues, not try to create an entirely new form of entity with a full set of rules for all the issues that arise in the life of an entity. So we created that first proposal, and then we said to ourselves, well, where would we expect that people might be most receptive to this idea? And the first state that we identified was Vermont, because Vermont has traditionally had a kind of different view of the world. Recall that Vermont for many years has been represented by one of the few independent senators who identifies as such, Bernie Sanders, and that's all part of the Vermont brand. And at the same time, we had contacts with other legislators, particularly through the Aspen Institute and people that had been involved there. So a legislator in Maryland, a state senator by the name of Jamie Raskin, was very intrigued by this notion. Jamie was a law school professor, taught constitutional law at American University in Washington. Incidentally, he's now in the U.S. Congress and was part of the prosecution of Trump in the impeachment trials as one of the managers for the House. In any event, I went up and met with the Bar Association people in Vermont that prepared their business entity laws. I actually happened to know them from prior activities, and went down to Maryland and talked to the people in the Maryland Bar Association who I knew from other activities were involved in these things. I was expecting that Vermont would be first, but it turns out that Jamie Raskin was a very effective legislator, and he, as a result, through his efforts, got the benefit corporation statute enacted in Maryland first. And then, of course, Vermont came along later. And at that point, we realized that we were onto something that might have wider appeal than we initially thought might be the case. So we began to talk about the concept.
So, Bill, on this, can I just ask what it actually took? So is it a bill needs to be introduced into a regional parliament and gets approval? What is the actual work? So
Yes.
Sorry.
So the process depends on how legislation begins in each jurisdiction. In the United States, the basic practice for business entity laws is for those laws to be drafted by committees of the Bar Association, by the business law section in most states, okay? And those were the people that I contacted in both Vermont and Maryland. Then at the same time, you want to find legislators who will be your champions. So, for example, Jamie Raskin down in Maryland, and we met legislators up in Vermont who were interested. In addition to that, you also need support from the community, from the constituents, because the politicians react to, pressure, or at least the interest, and they're motivated by doing things for their constituents. So it's important to have that grassroots support as well. So we went to the lawyers in Vermont and Maryland. We identified legislators. We had the bill introduced. Then we began to develop.
When you say legislator, that is normally a member of the regional parliament?
It's a member of the regional legislative body. The states in the United States, or in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, where we pass statutes, the territories, but the jurisdiction, right? And then we mobilized the business community, because B-Lab was also promoting certified B Corps, and we also partnered with other organizations, business for local living economies, sustainable business
And
groups.
so they did presentations to the legislators, or they went and
it depends.
Set up a manifestation like Greta Thunberg in front of the regional parliament. So how did that? I'm just wondering.
There were many instances where they actually presented testimony before legislative committees. Even more important, in my view, were meetings that they had with particular legislators that they may have known. There are lots of businesses who are politically active already, or the people involved in the business may know legislators. And there's nothing like a personal visit from a constituent, to motivate a legislator. So that happened. And then after Vermont and Maryland were enacted, what we did not do, which is kind of interesting in hindsight, is to sit down and map out a list and a plan for what states we would go to next. Instead, what we found is that people within the B Corp community in particular, as well as these other sustainable business networks, would hear about things and they would be particularly excited. And so the states that we went to, in the process were those where there was the most interest from the business community. And we were perfectly happy with that approach because, as I've already said, it's very important to have that grassroots support. So there was no organized program to say we go from this state to the next state to the following state. And we had great success, although in a few states, not a number, but in a few states, when we would meet with the Bar Association committee, they would not quite understand the concept. And they tended to move in the direction of the social purpose model, the double bottom line instead of the triple bottom line. And in a few states, we were unable to change their mind or to change the legislation to be what we really thought was the right approach, which is why there are some of those states with I shouldn't say the not as effective model. And then there were 2 states where we actually made it through the legislature and the governor vetoed the legislation.
Oh,
in both New Mexico and Maine, of all things.
Okay.
In Maine, this was quite a few years ago at this point. The governor of Maine, I can only describe as a wild man. He was really kind of out there in his political views, and he tended to actually veto most things that were presented to him that the legislature had passed. And people got used to the notion that the governor was going to veto and then the legislature would override his veto. And sure enough, we were a part of a number of bills that got vetoed. Unfortunately, it was near the end of the legislative session, and our principal sponsor got crosswise with other legislators on an unrelated issue. And so his bill was one of the ones that never got offered for a veto override vote. And so we actually died as a result of the governor's veto. A few years later, we came back, that governor was gone, and we were enacted in Maine. In New Mexico, we never finally did understand why the governor vetoed us. We suspected that it was because she had political ambitions and she was trying to figure out how to position herself on these kinds of issues. In any event, she left office and we've now been enacted in New Mexico as well. So we've overcome those 2 vetoes. The only place where we actually lost in the legislature was in the state of North Dakota, which was particularly surprising to me because the North Dakota system for their business entity laws is to rely on what Minnesota does. And I knew that already, and we successfully passed the benefit corporation legislation in Minnesota. So I assumed that it would be fairly easy in North Dakota because, they always do what Minnesota does. But there were a few voices on the very traditional conservative side who thought this was a bad idea and creeping socialism, or however they wanted to see it. And so we actually were voted down in North Dakota. The state that I have always found the most interesting, where we still have not passed the statute, is Michigan. And in Michigan, we ran into one person who was a particularly important or effective voice in the Chamber of Commerce in Michigan, the largest business association in Michigan. And he was afraid that if we passed this statute and this idea caught on, he would be forced to adopt this form as well. And that problem of will this eventually cause businesses who may not want to become benefit corporations, feel forced to become benefit corporations, stopped us in Michigan. for quite a while. There's actually a possibility that we will pass in Michigan. There's still an effort to get this done. But I always thought that that was the most interesting question. Now, as it turns out, we've had benefit corporations on the books since 2010. I have never kind of seen this worry come to fruition. Unfortunately, I would concede that that's probably because we haven't had as much of an impact as I would like to see us eventually have. Hard to tell. In a number of other states, however, we actually were endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce.
Mm.
So of all places, in South Carolina, for example, their Chamber of Commerce supported our bill. Pennsylvania, similarly. In those states, it was largely because companies that were members of the chamber were supportive of the concept. So again, it takes you back to the importance of the grassroots.
Mm.
And, you know, they were able to say to their fellows in the Chamber of Commerce membership, look, this is something we'd like to do. It has nothing to do with you. You don't have to adopt it, but let us do this. And they said, okay, you know, that's fine. We will support. So there were quite a few places where that happened as well.
Maybe, Bill, we're out of time already. So can I make a suggestion that if you find the time again ever?
Oh, sure. Happy to do that.
Can we split it into two sections maybe? Because then we can take the second section in the practicalities and the outlook and the critical, and you almost started, right? Why didn't we have as much impact as maybe was hoped? Maybe we close with any sort of anecdote. I was just looking up that LePage in 2013 in Maine apparently said it would have been confusing for people if we had passed benefit corporation legislation, which sounds like a bad excuse. But were there any real difficult moments? Did you have to, I don't know how you said it at the beginning, work the politics? So was there a moment where you really had to battle, like California, where you suddenly ended up with two legislations? Or so? Any final anecdote for this episode?
Yes, we had significant battles in both California and North Carolina. Our battle in California was with the Bar Association, because there was a very vocal member of the Bar Association that was convinced that the social purpose model was the right one. And eventually in California, they adopted both. Their social purpose legislation is actually a complete corporation law, unlike the model I was describing where it's simply an overlay. So they have the model that I like, which is, you know, you rely on the basic law, but here are certain things that change. And then they also have a model that's the social purpose corporation, which it's like 70 or 80 pages long because it's a full corporation law, which I thought was wrong, but there are just egos and classic politics and, you know, desire to promote their own view of the world and build their own practices and things. And so there was a big split within the Bar Association in California. In North Carolina, on the other hand, we were pushing this concept at a time when there was a very strong conservative movement in North Carolina. Actually, North Carolina has changed quite a bit since we were there in like 7 or 8 years ago. It's more of a toss-up. You may remember in the recent election, it was almost seen as a battleground state because it was more evenly balanced. But at the time we were there were very loud conservative voices, particularly in the business community, that kept us from ever getting a vote in the North Carolina legislature. And then next time when we talk, we have to talk about the next iteration, which is a desire in certain places to make the benefit corporation the model for every business as opposed to being optional. And I can tell you that story as well. That's just a little teaser.
Yeah, very good teaser. I still want to have one tiny little last question. So what is the one lesson learned from you to be taken forward from these legal battles? Just one lesson.
One lesson. the importance of being involved at the very start of the process, as opposed to coming in after people had started to talk about the concept and didn't correctly position it. We've had several places where we had to do a lot of catch up to come back and try to get people back on side. It's a classic example of human psychology. It's very difficult to change somebody's mind once they've reached an opinion. It's much easier to help them form their opinion at the beginning. So that would be my positive lesson. We will also talk next time, another teaser, about whether I think it's as effective as I hope it will be, and what we need to do as next steps to improve things and move forward.
You're creating some very effective teasers here, Bill. I think
2 teasers. We're all hooked now.
who could now miss out on the second part? But with that, I want to what a brilliant conversation. And I must say, in my mind, I've reappreciated benefit. I like benefit B Corps already, but I think with what you're describing now, it opens a different vantage point on what benefit corporations was meant to be. And I'm now super curious to learn, how is the original spirit, I might almost call it, of benefit corporation substantiated or not in B Corp, in the B Lab work, so to speak. So let's pick this up in the second part. Bill,
another teaser, yes.
another teaser. Thank you so much for making the time. It's brilliant, and I love the conversations with you. So thanks a lot, and speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Delighted to be here and look forward to part 2.
Thank you very much.